The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Millbrook as Thomas Blackwood stepped out of the general store, his weathered hands gripping a crumpled newspaper. At 42, Thomas owned the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties, but wealth couldn't fill the empty rooms of his sprawling farmhouse or quiet the echoing silence that greeted him each evening. The newspaper advertisement had caught his eye like a lightning strike, seeking marriage partnership practical arrangement only. Childless woman, 28, requires immediate placement. $1 fee. Thomas had stared at those words for nearly an hour, his coffee growing cold as he sat in the corner booth of Murphy's Diner. Marriage had never been about love for him. His first wife, Margaret, had died of fever 3 years into their marriage, taking with her any dreams of children and leaving behind only painful memories. Since then, the Blackwood Ranch had become his entire world. But even a man devoted to his land needed companionship. The address led him to a modest boarding house on the outskirts of town, where Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the landlady, greeted him with suspicious eyes. "You hear about the advertisement?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, ma'am. Thomas Blackwood's the name." Mrs. Hartwell's expression softened slightly. Everyone in the county knew the Blackwood name. "She's in the parlor. Been waiting for someone respectable to answer that ad for weeks now." In the dimly lit parlor, Thomas met Clara Matthews for the first time. She sat perfectly straight in a worn velvet chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her brown eyes held a mixture of hope and resignation that struck Thomas immediately. She wore a plain blue dress that had seen better days, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, rising to greet him. Her voice was soft but steady. "Mrs. Hartwell said you might be interested in a practical arrangement." Thomas removed his hat, suddenly aware of his rough appearance next to her refined manner. "Miss Matthews, I'll speak plainly. I run a large ranch, and I need a wife to manage the household. I'm not looking for romance or complications, just honest partnership." Clara's eyes never wavered from his face. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Blackwood. I should tell you up front that I cannot bear children. That's why the advertisement specified my situation. Many men want families, and I cannot provide that." The words hung in the air between them. Thomas felt a strange sense of relief rather than disappointment. Children meant vulnerability, meant having something precious to lose again. "That suits me fine, Miss Matthews. I'm too old to start raising young ones anyway." They spent the next hour discussing practical matters. Clara had been a schoolteacher in Denver before circumstances forced her to seek other arrangements. She could read, write, and manage household accounts. She was clean, quiet, and asked for nothing more than room, board, and respect. "The $1 fee," Thomas finally asked. "What's that about?" Clara's cheeks colored slightly. "It makes the arrangement official, prevents any misunderstandings about the nature of our agreement." 3 days later, they stood before Judge Morrison in the courthouse, with Mrs. Hartwell and the court clerk as witnesses. Thomas handed Clara a single silver dollar before they exchanged simple vows. No white dress, no flowers, no celebration afterward. Just 2 practical people making a practical arrangement. The ride to Blackwood Ranch took 2 hours in Thomas's wagon. Clara sat beside him in silence, clutching a small carpetbag that contained all her worldly possessions. As they crested the hill that revealed the sprawling ranch below, Thomas felt compelled to break the silence. "It's not fancy," he said, gesturing toward the large but simple farmhouse, "but it's solid and warm." Clara's eyes widened as she took in the sight. The house was larger than anything she'd ever lived in, with a wide front porch and neat flower beds that had been carefully maintained despite having no woman's touch. Beyond the house, She could see the vast pastures dotted with cattle, the large red barn, and several smaller outbuildings. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and Thomas felt something loosen in his chest at the genuine wonder in her voice. The first weeks of their arrangement were awkward, but cordial. Thomas showed Clara through the house, explaining the routines and expectations. She would manage the household, prepare meals, and handle the domestic responsibilities. He would provide for her material needs and treat her with respect. They would maintain separate bedrooms and lives that intersected only when necessary. Clara proved to be an excellent housekeeper. Within a month, the Blackwood house had transformed from a bachelor's sparse quarters into a proper home. She cooked hearty meals, mended his work clothes, and managed the household accounts with impressive efficiency. She never complained about the isolation or asked for luxuries beyond basic necessities. Thomas found himself looking forward to their quiet dinners together. Clara was intelligent and well-read, able to discuss current events and share observations about ranch life that often surprised him with their insight. She never pried into his past or pushed for intimacy beyond their agreed-upon partnership. The first year passed peacefully. Clara established a small garden behind the house and showed remarkable skill with both vegetables and flowers. She befriended the ranch hands' wives who lived in the smaller houses scattered across the property, though she never gossiped or overstepped her position as the rancher's wife. Thomas began to appreciate her quiet strength during the harsh winter months, when blizzards isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. While he worried about supplies and livestock, Clara calmly rationed their stores and found creative ways to make their provisions last. She read to him in the evenings by the fireplace, her voice bringing life to the words of novels and newspapers. By the second year, their arrangement had settled into comfortable routine. Thomas consulted Clara on ranch decisions, valuing her practical wisdom and different perspective. She never overstepped his authority, but her suggestions often proved valuable. When the bank threatened foreclosure on the neighboring Spencer Ranch, it was Clara who suggested they might buy the additional land at a fair price rather than let the bank seize it. "The Spencer family has 3 young children," she said quietly over dinner. "If we can afford it, perhaps we could offer them work in exchange for staying in their home until they get back on their feet." Thomas agreed, struck by her compassion and practical thinking. The decision proved profitable for the ranch and earned them the loyalty of the Spencer family, who became some of their most trusted workers. The third year brought challenges that tested their partnership. A drought threatened their water supply, and several neighboring ranches were forced to sell their cattle at devastating losses. Clara suggested they dig a new well in a location she'd noticed where the grass stayed green longest during dry spells. Her intuition proved correct, and they struck water at just 30 feet. During the long, dry months, Clara worked alongside Thomas and the ranch hands to save what cattle they could. She never complained about the hard work or the uncertainty maintaining the household and morale, even when food had to be strictly rationed. It was during this difficult time that Thomas began to notice subtle changes in his wife. Their relationship, while still based on their original practical arrangement, had deepened into genuine friendship and mutual respect. He found himself confiding in Clara about his fears for the ranch and his memories of the difficult years after Margaret's death. "You never talk about your life before," he said one evening as they sat on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky red above their drought-stressed pastures. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. "Some things are better left in the past, Thomas. We both came to this arrangement carrying burdens. Perhaps it's enough that we've found peace together." Thomas accepted her words, though he sometimes wondered about the sadness that occasionally shadowed her eyes when she thought he wasn't watching. The fourth year brought better weather and renewed prosperity. Their cattle herd had not only survived the drought, but emerged stronger. Clara's garden flourished, and she began preserving food not just for their household, but to trade with neighbors. Her reputation as a skilled homemaker and fair dealer spread throughout the county. Thomas realized he had come to depend on Clara's presence in ways he hadn't expected when they made their dollar marriage. She had become not just his partner in managing the ranch, but his closest friend and confidant. Their evening conversations ranged from ranch business to books, from weather patterns to philosophical discussions that stretched late into the night. The 5th year marked a turning point in their relationship. During a particularly difficult calving season, Clara worked beside Thomas for days without rest, helping deliver difficult births and nursing sick animals. One night, exhausted and covered in mud, and worse, they collapsed together on the front porch steps. "I never expected this," Thomas said, looking at his capable wife who had just spent 12 hours helping save a struggling calf. "What?" Clara asked, wiping dirt from her face. "To find a true partner, someone who would stand beside me through everything." Clara's eyes met his in the moonlight, and something passed between them that went deeper than their practical arrangement. "I never expected it either," she admitted. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Thomas didn't retire to his separate bedroom. Their relationship evolved from partnership to genuine affection, though Clara continued to maintain there could be no children from their union. The 6th year brought them closer together as they faced new challenges and celebrated successes as true partners. Clara had transformed not just the household, but the entire ranch culture, treating the workers with respect and creating a sense of community that improved productivity and loyalty. Thomas found himself falling in love with his dollar bride, though he never spoke the words aloud. Their arrangement had specified practical partnership, not romantic love, and he didn't want to pressure Clara into feelings she might not share. The 7th year tested their bond when Thomas's brother arrived unexpectedly, bringing news that their father had died and left debts that threatened the family name. Clara stood firmly beside Thomas as they navigated the legal complications and financial pressures, using her careful management of their accounts to help settle the debts without losing their ranch. During this stressful time, Thomas noticed that Clara seemed more tired than usual and sometimes excused herself from meals, claiming stomach troubles. He worried about her health, but respected her privacy when she assured him it was nothing serious. As the 8th year of their marriage began, Thomas reflected on how completely his life had changed since that day he answered Clara's advertisement. The lonely rancher who had sought only practical companionship had found something far more valuable than he'd ever imagined possible. Clara had become the center of his world, though he still didn't fully understand the shadows that sometimes crossed her face or the letters she occasionally received and quickly tucked away. Their relationship had grown beyond anything either had expected when they exchanged vows for a single silver dollar, but Thomas sensed there were still secrets between them. He had no idea that the greatest surprise of his life was about to unfold, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his wife and their 8 years together. The woman who had told him she was childless was about to reveal a truth that would change both their lives forever. The morning of their 8th wedding anniversary dawned crisp and clear, with autumn painting the ranch lands in brilliant oranges and golds. Thomas woke early, as was his habit, but found himself lingering in bed, watching Clara sleep peacefully beside him. Over the years, her face had grown dearer to him than any treasure, though he still respected the boundaries of their original arrangement. Clara stirred, opening her brown eyes to find him watching her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. 8 years, Thomas replied, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her forehead. "When I paid that dollar, I thought I was buying a housekeeper. I had no idea I was getting the best partner a man could ask for." A shadow crossed Clara's face so quickly Thomas almost missed it. She sat up, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. "Thomas, there are things about my past that you don't know. Things I should have told you long ago. Before Thomas could respond, the sound of hoofbeats in the yard interrupted them. Through the window, they could see a rider approaching fast, dust flying from his horse's hooves. Thomas recognized Jake Morrison, the telegraph operator from town, and the urgency of his approach sent a chill down his spine. Thomas dressed quickly and met Jake at the front door. "What's the emergency, Jake?" The young man was breathing hard, his face flushed from the hard ride. "Mr. Blackwood, there's a telegram for Mrs. Blackwood. Came in on the evening wire, but it seemed urgent enough to bring out first thing." Thomas took the telegram, noting the return address was from Denver. Clara appeared at his shoulder, already dressed and composed despite the early hour. "It's for you," Thomas said, handing her the yellow paper. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she read the message. The color drained from her face, and she gripped the doorframe for support. "Oh, no," she whispered. "Oh, dear God, no." "Clara, what is it?" Thomas caught her arm, alarmed by her reaction. She looked up at him with eyes full of tears and something else, something that looked like fear. "Thomas, I have to go to Denver immediately. There's been an accident." "I'll come with you," Thomas said without hesitation. "No." Clara's response was sharp, almost panicked. "I mean, you can't leave the ranch right now. The fall roundup is starting, and the new calves need monitoring. This is something I have to handle alone." Thomas studied his wife's face, seeing the determination beneath the distress. "Clara, whatever this is about, we're partners. You don't have to face it alone." Clara's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Some things a person has to face alone, Thomas. Please just trust me. I'll explain everything when I return." Against his better judgment, Thomas agreed to let Clara travel to Denver alone. He drove her to town to catch the morning stage, watching helplessly as she climbed aboard with only a small traveling bag. She turned back once to wave, and he saw something in her expression that chilled him, a look that suggested she wasn't certain she would be coming back. The first week of Clara's absence passed slowly. Thomas threw himself into ranch work, trying to ignore the empty house and the growing worry that gnawed at him. Mrs. Henderson, one of the ranch hands' wives, came daily to prepare meals and maintain the household, but her capable presence only highlighted Clara's absence. On the 8th day, a second telegram arrived. Thomas tore it open with shaking hands, expecting news of Clara's return or explanation of her delay. Instead, he found a message that raised more questions than it answered. "Must stay longer. Complicated situation. Will write with details. Please be patient. Clara." Thomas crumpled the telegram in frustration. In 8 years of marriage, Clara had never been anything but forthright with him. This secrecy was completely unlike her, and his imagination began conjuring increasingly dark possibilities for what could be keeping her in Denver. The days stretched into 2 weeks, then 3. Thomas received only one letter, brief and unsatisfying, explaining that Clara was dealing with family matters that required her extended presence. The letter mentioned no details about the accident or whom it might have affected. During Clara's absence, Thomas found himself noticing things about his wife's life that he had overlooked before. While cleaning their bedroom, he discovered a small wooden box hidden beneath her personal items in the wardrobe. Inside, he found letters tied with ribbon, all postmarked from Denver and dating back to before their marriage. Thomas stared at the letters for a long time, wrestling with his conscience. Clara had always respected his privacy, never prying into his past or reading his personal correspondence. But the letters might contain information about where she had gone, and why information that could help him understand what was happening. Finally, his worry overcoming his scruples, Thomas untied the ribbon and read the first letter. It was dated 6 months before their wedding and began, "My dearest Clara, the children ask about you every day." The letter was signed "Your loving sister, Margaret," and contained references to 7 names: David, Sarah, Michael, Emma, Joseph, Rebecca, and little Mary. Each name was followed by details about their ages, their health, their schooling, and their longing for Aunt Clara. Thomas's hands shook as he read letter after letter, each one painting a picture of Clara's life that was completely at odds with everything she had told him. The letters spoke of children who called her Mama Clara, of financial struggles, of Clara's sister Margaret, working multiple jobs to support the family after her husband's death in a mining accident. The most recent letters, dating from just before Clara's departure for the ranch, revealed the full truth. Margaret was dying of consumption, and Clara had come to marry Thomas not because she was childless and seeking practical arrangement, but because she desperately needed the stability and income to support 7 children she had left behind in Denver. "I know you're making a great sacrifice," one of Margaret's letters read, "leaving us to marry a stranger so you can send money to keep the family together. But we'll wait for you, sister. However long it takes, we'll wait." Thomas sank into the chair by the bedroom window, his mind reeling. For 8 years, Clara had been sending most of her household allowance back to Denver. For 8 years, she had been supporting 7 children while telling him she was childless. The magnitude of her deception and sacrifice left him breathless. But as the shock wore off, Thomas found himself understanding the impossible position Clara had been in. A woman with 7 children to support had no prospects for marriage, especially not to a man like him who wanted no complications. She had made the only choice available to her, sacrificing her own happiness and proximity to the children she loved in order to ensure their survival. Now, apparently, Margaret was gone, and Clara was facing the reality of 7 children who needed her direct care. Thomas understood why she had been so afraid to tell him. Their marriage contract had been based on her being childless, and she had every reason to fear he would end their arrangement if he learned the truth. The 4th week of Clara's absence brought another telegram, this one longer and more detailed. Margaret passed peacefully. Children need permanent home. Cannot return to ranch with 7 children as agreed in our marriage. Will understand if you seek annulment. Will never forget your kindness these 8 years. Clara. Thomas read the telegram 3 times before its full meaning hit him. Clara was giving him an out, expecting him to choose the comfortable life he had known over the chaos of suddenly becoming responsible for 7 children. She was preparing to sacrifice herself again, this time giving up the security and partnership she had found at the ranch to care for the children alone. He was still holding the telegram when Mrs. Henderson knocked on the front door. "Mr. Blackwood," she said when he answered, "there's a man here to see you. Says it's about Mrs. Blackwood." The visitor was a well-dressed man in his 50s who introduced himself as Mr. Charles Whitmore, a lawyer from Denver. "Mr. Blackwood, I am here on behalf of your wife regarding the custody of 7 minor children following their guardian's death." "Come in," Thomas said, leading the lawyer to his study. "Tell me what's happening." Mr. Whitmore spread several legal documents across Thomas's desk. "Mrs. Clara Blackwood is the legal guardian of her deceased sister's children, ranging in age from 3 to 15. She's asked me to prepare papers transferring custody to the Denver Children's Home, as she believes her marriage arrangement prevents her from caring for them herself." "The Children's Home?" Thomas's voice was sharp. "What kind of place is that?" The lawyer's expression was grim. "Overcrowded, understaffed, and, frankly, not a place where children thrive. But Mrs. Blackwood believes she has no choice. She's quite adamant that she cannot bring 7 children into a marriage where they weren't originally wanted." Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out over the vast expanse of his ranch. Thousands of acres, numerous buildings, more space than one man and one woman could ever use. He thought about Clara's sacrifice, about 8 years of marriage built on her willingness to give up everything for those children's welfare. "Mr. Whitmore," Thomas said finally. "What would I need to do to legally adopt 7 children?" The lawyer's eyebrows shot up. "Are you saying you want to take custody of these children, Mr. Blackwood?" "I'm saying that my wife has spent 8 years supporting those children from a distance. It's time for her to have them home where they belong." Mr. Whitmore smiled for the first time since arriving. "In that case, Mr. Blackwood, I believe I can help you." Mrs. Blackwood has been reluctant to even discuss this possibility, convinced that you would be unwilling to take on such responsibility. She's been quite distressed about the situation. Thomas spent the next 3 hours with the lawyer, signing documents and making arrangements. By evening, he was the legal guardian of 7 children he had never met, children whose existence had been hidden from him for 8 years. The next morning, Thomas left the ranch in the hands of his foreman and boarded the train for Denver. He carried with him legal papers, a bank draft for substantial funds, and a heart full of nervous anticipation about meeting the 7 little ones who were about to transform his life completely. The train journey gave him time to think about the woman who had become so precious to him. Clara had sacrificed everything, first leaving the children to support them from afar, and now preparing to give up her marriage to care for them directly. Her capacity for selfless love amazed him, even as he realized how completely she had underestimated his feelings for her. As the train pulled into Denver's bustling station, Thomas reflected on the irony of their situation. He had married a woman he thought was childless, only to discover she was mother to 7. She had married him believing he wanted no children, not knowing that his reluctance had been born of fear rather than genuine dislike of young ones. Tomorrow he would surprise Clara with the news that their family was about to grow by 7, and their quiet ranch home was about to become filled with the laughter and chaos of children. The dollar he had paid for a practical wife 8 years ago was about to yield the greatest return of his life. But first he had to find Clara and convince her that some arrangements were meant to grow into something far more beautiful than their original terms had ever imagined. The address Mr. Whitmore had given Thomas led him to a modest boarding house in one of Denver's quieter neighborhoods. As he climbed the front steps, Thomas could hear the sound of children's voices drifting from within, a sound so foreign to his experience that he paused momentarily at the door. Mrs. Abernathy, the boarding house proprietor, greeted him with curious eyes. "You must be Mr. Blackwood," she said, having been forewarned of his arrival. "Your wife is in the back parlor with the children. I must warn you, sir, it's quite a handful she's got there." Thomas followed the woman down a narrow hallway, his heart pounding with each step. 8 years of marriage to Clara, and he was about to meet the most important people in her world for the first time. At the parlor door, Mrs. Abernathy knocked softly. "Mrs. Blackwood, your husband is here." The voices inside fell silent. Thomas heard Clara's sharp intake of breath, followed by rustling fabric and whispered instructions to be quiet. When the door opened, Clara stood there pale and wide-eyed as if seeing a ghost. "Thomas," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" Behind her, Thomas caught his first glimpse of the 7 children. They ranged from a tiny girl who couldn't be more than 3 years old to a tall, serious boy who looked to be about 15. All 7 pairs of eyes were fixed on him with mixtures of curiosity, hope, and wariness. "We need to talk," Thomas said gently. "All of us." Clara stepped aside reluctantly, and Thomas entered the cramped parlor where 8 people had been living for the past month. The space was clean, but obviously inadequate for such a large group. Makeshift beds lined the walls, and personal belongings were stacked in neat piles wherever space allowed. "Children," Clara said, her voice shaky. "This is my husband, Mr. Thomas Blackwood." The oldest boy stepped forward with remarkable composure for someone his age. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, I'm David Matthews. Thank you for taking care of our Aunt Clara all these years." His formal manner couldn't hide the protective stance he took near the smaller children. Thomas studied the boy's face, seeing Clara's intelligent brown eyes and determined chin. "David, it's good to meet you. Clara has been taking care of me far more than I've been taking care of her." A girl who appeared to be about 12 moved closer, holding the hand of a younger boy. "I'm Sarah, and this is Michael. Are you really going to let Aunt Clara come back to your ranch?" The directness of the question caught Thomas off guard, but he appreciated the child's honesty. "Sarah, I came here because I want all of you to come to the ranch." The silence that followed was broken by the smallest girl, who tugged on Clara's skirt. "Mama Clara, is the nice man going to be our papa now?" Clara's face crumpled, and she swept the little girl into her arms. "Oh, Mary, sweetheart, it's complicated." "No," Thomas said firmly, causing every head in the room to turn toward him. "It's not complicated at all." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the legal documents Mr. Whitmore had prepared. "Mary, if you want me to be your papa, then that's exactly what I'm going to be." Clara stared at the papers in disbelief. "Thomas, what have you done?" "What I should have done years ago if I'd known the truth," Thomas replied. He turned to address all 7 children who were watching this exchange with rapt attention. "My name is Thomas Blackwood, and I own a ranch in Millbrook County that's big enough for all of us. I've just legally adopted every one of you, which means you're not going to any children's home. And Clara doesn't have to choose between us and you anymore." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. 3-year-old Mary clapped her hands in delight, while 10-year-old Joseph whooped with joy. Emma, who appeared to be about 8, burst into tears of relief. The older children remained more cautious, but Thomas could see hope beginning to bloom in their faces. David stepped forward again, his mature demeanor touched with uncertainty. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, with respect, you don't know us. We're not always easy to handle, and there's 7 of us. That's a lot of responsibility for someone who didn't ask for children." Thomas looked at this boy who had clearly been carrying adult responsibilities far too young, and his heart ached for what these children had endured. "David, you're right that I don't know you yet, but I know Clara, and I know that anyone she loves the way she loves all of you must be pretty special people. As for not asking for children, sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never knew we needed." Clara had been silent during this exchange, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas, why are you doing this? When we married, you specifically said you didn't want children. Our whole arrangement was based on me being childless." Thomas turned to face his wife, aware that 7 young lives hung on his next words. "Clara, our arrangement was based on a lot of things that stopped being true years ago. I thought I was hiring a housekeeper, but I got a partner. I thought I wanted to be left alone, but I found out I needed companionship. And I thought I didn't want children because I was afraid of losing people I loved. But these past weeks, without you, taught me that being afraid to love someone doesn't protect you from losing them. It just means you miss out on all the love while you have them." 12-year-old Sarah had been listening intently to every word. "Aunt Clara," she said solemnly, "I think you should tell him about the letters." Clara's face flushed. "Sarah, that's not important now." "What letters?" Thomas asked, though he suspected he knew. Sarah ignored Clara's warning look. "The letters you wrote to Mama before she died. The ones where you said you loved Mr. Blackwood, but couldn't tell him because you were afraid he'd send you away if he knew about us." The parlor fell completely silent. Clara stared at Sarah in mortification, while Thomas felt his heart stop for a moment before beginning to beat faster than ever. "You love me?" Thomas asked quietly. Clara lifted her chin with the same dignity she had shown 8 years earlier in Mrs. Hartwell's parlor. "Yes, I love you. I have for years. But our arrangement—" "Forget the arrangement," Thomas said, stepping closer to her. "I love you too, Clara. I've loved you probably since that second winter when you suggested we help the Spencer family. I've been too scared and too proud to say it, thinking you wanted to keep things practical between us. 6-year-old Rebecca, who had been quietly watching from beside Emma, suddenly spoke up. Are you going to kiss now? Mama and Papa used to kiss when they said they loved each other. The adult tension broke into laughter, and Thomas reached for Clara's hand. What do you say, Mrs. Blackwood? Think it's time we stopped being quite so practical. Clara's tears turned from sorrow to joy as she nodded. When Thomas kissed her, 7 children cheered, and for the first time in years, Clara felt like her broken family was finally whole again. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Thomas arranged for train passage for 9 people, shipped their few belongings, and sent telegrams to his ranch foreman explaining that the family was expanding significantly. The children were initially overwhelmed by Thomas's generosity, but they quickly warmed to his gentle manner and obvious devotion to Clara. David proved to be a natural leader who helped manage the younger children during the journey. Sarah appointed herself as Thomas's educator, filling him in on each child's personality, preferences, and peculiarities. Michael was quiet but observant, clearly studying this man who had suddenly become his father. Emma attached herself to Clara, afraid to let her out of sight after weeks of uncertainty. Joseph was all energy and questions, fascinated by everything he could see from the train windows. Rebecca was the peacemaker, soothing hurt feelings and settling disputes among her siblings. And little Mary decided that Thomas was the most wonderful man in the world and spent most of the journey perched on his lap, chattering about everything and nothing. Clara watched this transformation with amazement. The man who had told her 8 years ago that he was too old to raise children was patiently answering Mary's endless questions, helping Joseph spot landmarks through the window, and discussing ranch work with David as if the boy were already a partner rather than just a child. When the train finally pulled into Millbrook Station, Thomas pointed out the window to where his ranch foreman, Jake Peterson, waited with 2 wagons to transport them all home. "There's Jake," Thomas told the children. "He's been running the ranch while I was away. Good man. And his wife, Martha, makes the best apple pie in the county." The ride to the ranch was filled with excitement as the children got their first look at their new home territory. When they crested the hill that revealed the sprawling Blackwood Ranch, the reaction was even more dramatic than Clara's had been 8 years earlier. "Is that all ours?" Joseph asked in amazement. "It's bigger than all of Denver," Emma exclaimed. David was studying the layout with the eye of someone who understood land and livestock. "Mr. Blackwood, this is incredible. How many head of cattle do you run?" "About 3,000 right now," Thomas replied, pleased by the boy's intelligent interest. "And David, I think it's time you started calling me Thomas, or Dad if you're comfortable with that. Mr. Blackwood is too formal for family." The word family sent a visible ripple of emotion through all 7 children. They had been without a stable family structure for so long that the concept seemed almost too good to believe. As they pulled up to the farmhouse, Martha Peterson emerged from the front door, followed by several ranch hands' wives who had been recruited to help prepare the house for its sudden expansion. Martha had been Thomas's neighbor for 15 years and had known him through his first marriage and years of bachelorhood. "Well, Thomas Blackwood," Martha called out with a broad smile, "looks like you've brought us quite a surprise." The house had been transformed during Thomas's absence. The 3 spare bedrooms had been furnished with beds and clothing suitable for children of various ages. The dining room table had been extended to accommodate 9 people, and Martha had filled the kitchen with enough food to feed what she laughingly called Thomas's sudden army. That first evening, as the family gathered around the extended dining table, Thomas looked around at the faces that would now be part of his daily life. Clara sat at his right hand, radiant with happiness at finally, having her two worlds united. David had taken the seat at the far end of the table, already assuming his role as the responsible older brother. Sarah was helping little Mary cut her food, while Michael sat quietly taking in every detail of his new surroundings. Emma stayed close to Clara, still not entirely convinced this wasn't a dream that might end. Joseph was enthusiastically describing the ranch to Rebecca, who listened with patient amusement. "I have something to say," Thomas announced, tapping his water glass with his knife. 7 young faces, and one beloved adult face, turned toward him expectantly. "8 years ago, I paid $1 for the best deal of my life," he began, smiling at Clara. "Tonight, I want to welcome all of you to the Blackwood family. This ranch has been too quiet for too long, and I suspect that's about to change permanently. Will we really get to stay?" Mary asked, her 3-year-old voice carrying all the uncertainty of a child who had lost too much. Thomas reached across the table to touch her small hand. "Mary, this is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. All of you. We're family now, and family sticks together." That night, after the children had been settled into their new bedrooms, Thomas and Clara sat on their front porch, listening to the sounds of their transformed household. Soft voices drifted from upstairs as the older children helped the younger ones adjust to their new surroundings. "Are you sure about this?" Clara asked, leaning against Thomas's shoulder. 7 children is a lot different from the quiet life you've known. Thomas wrapped his arms around his wife, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "Clara, for 8 years you've been supporting these children from hundreds of miles away, sending them money and love through letters while building a life with me. You've been torn in half all this time, and I was too blind to see it." "I was afraid to tell you the truth," Clara admitted. "Our agreement was so clear about what you wanted and didn't want." "Our agreement was the starting point, not the ending," Thomas said. "The best agreements grow into something better than either party originally imagined." From upstairs, they could hear Rebecca singing a soft lullaby to Mary, her sweet voice carrying through the open windows. David's deeper voice was explaining something to Michael, while Sarah's laughter bubbled up from the room she shared with Emma. "Listen to that," Thomas said with wonder. "This house has been waiting 8 years for those sounds." As if summoned by his words, Joseph appeared at the front door in his nightshirt. "Mama Clara, I can't sleep. It's too quiet here." Clara laughed, remembering the cramped boarding house where 7 children had shared every sound and breath. "Come here, sweetheart." Joseph padded onto the porch and settled himself on the steps at their feet. Within minutes, he was joined by Emma, who was homesick for her siblings despite being in the same house. Then Rebecca appeared, followed by Michael, and finally Sarah carrying Mary. David emerged last, smiling sheepishly. "I told them you'd probably want them to go back to bed, but family belongs together," Thomas finished, making room on the porch steps for all of them. And so the Blackwood family spent their first night together on the front porch of the ranch house, watching stars appear over the vast Texas sky, while 7 children and 2 adults who had found each other across impossible odds learned what it meant to finally, truly be home. The dollar Thomas had paid for a practical wife 8 years earlier had just purchased him the richest life he could have imagined. And the woman who had sacrificed everything for love had discovered that the greatest gambles sometimes yield the most beautiful rewards. As Clara settled Mary more comfortably in her lap and felt Thomas's steady presence beside her, she reflected on the winding path that had brought them all together. From a desperate advertisement in a Denver newspaper to this perfect moment surrounded by children's laughter and her husband's love, every sacrifice had led to this. The Blackwood Ranch would never be quiet again, and Thomas wouldn't have it any other way.